Battleground, New York City, the fight for your vote. Your front row seat to the battle for New York's next mayor. It's the old guard clinging to power, chasing a candidate they never saw coming. Every night, our experts break it down.
What New Yorkers want above all else is authenticity.
We're listening to the people who matter most, you, the voters. And when the candidates sit across from us, nothing's off the table. What's your plan to make New York City feel like a safer city?
S.E. Cup, that's your perception. Of course, there's a lot of crime.
So what's happening right now? Let's dive in. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. It is Thursday, October 23rd. We are 12 days away now from this all-important New York City mayor's race. And last night was a game changer. Or was it? The second and final debate was full of fireworks, but did it move the needle at all for Andrew Cuomo or Curtis Sliwa, who've been trailing frontrunners Ron Mamdani since the primary? Let's get into it. Joining me now is Craig McCarthy, City Hall Bureau Chief for the New York Post. Craig, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Okay, the big news of the day is that incumbent Mayor Eric Adams, who dropped out of the race weeks ago, will reportedly endorse Andrew Cuomo. What can you tell us about that?
Well, so last night, Andrew Cuomo rushed out of the debate, sat courtside with Eric Adams, where they flashed thumbs up. I mean, the tweets that were coming out of Eric Adams' campaign were screaming all but endorsement at the time. So today he's endorsing him. They're walking around Harlem right now. They're shaking hands and trying to do some retail politics, holding a press conference. Again, when Eric Adams dropped out of the race, he was polling between 4% and 8%, depending on which poll. So does it move the needle? We don't really know. I mean, we've seen the scenarios where he does drop out and Cuomo jumps to 33, 35% range. It's going to depend. Listen, Eric Adams is a prolific campaigner. Does he have his heart in this? And can he go out and hit the streets with him? That could make a difference.
For 12 days, yeah. I mean, there was, before he dropped out, there was some bad blood. We heard some barbs being traded between the two. So how do you think this endorsement came together?
I mean, this has been months in the making, right? I mean, Eric Adams was trying to carve out the moderate lane. Andrew Cuomo was trying to carve out the moderate lane. There's been bad blood because Cuomo swore up and down he would never run against Eric in this race. But listen, at the end of the day, they're both politicians. They're going to eat their words. He's out there today saying, "Oh, my brother knocked out my tooth. We've said worse to each other, and I call them a snake and a liar." But whatever, that's just politics. I mean, that's they're going to move on. They're going to try to make sure that. Listen, at the end of the day, this Zohran Mamdani to Eric Adams is the antithesis of everything he stands for as a politician. And I think he's willing, and he's showing that he's willing to swallow any animosity he has for somebody like Andrew Cuomo to try to do anything he can to prevent him from taking over City Hall.
Yeah, surely stranger things have happened. We're going to do some post-debate analysis with our friend John Avlon in a minute. But Craig, any word from the candidates on how they're feeling the day after?
Well, I mean, listen, Andrew Cuomo came out of that instantly. We were hearing from people, surrogates around him, that they were very happy how he performed. And they should be. Yeah. He performed much better than he did in the prior debate. I think this is also there was a live audience. There was a lot to feed off of. Even, Curtis Sliwa did great in the first debate, I thought, but he didn't have that kind of energy to feed off of. And I think, they kind of keyed in, and the moderators did a really good job of pressing Zohran Mamdani on a lot of the intricacies of New York City and pushed him to push past his talking points. And he kind of failed to meet that moment. So I know inside the Mamdani campaign, they know they didn't perform well, but again, does it matter to them? I think they think they have a sizable lead. So, they just need to make sure they don't trip over themselves over the next 12 days and they walk into City Hall.
Before the debate, Sliwa was facing immense pressure to drop out. We know that he angrily stormed out of his own radio show yesterday when he was pressed about that. Anything from his team today?
I mean, they're, consistently hitting the ground. They're trying to get any support, call for Cuomo to drop out. But, we should note that he hasn't pushed above 20% in any polls. They're struggling to get a coalition of people together besides the small group of Republicans in the city, to back him and to do these things. So I think they're kind of scrambling at this point.
There's a report in the Wall Street Journal today that I read that says that President Trump is privately telling his allies that Zoran Mamdani is unbeatable. Last night, Andrew Cuomo said that Trump was hoping Mamdani would win, despite all his barbs and jabs at him. What's your take on that?
Well, I think Trump is also publicly saying this, right? He said it from the Oval the other day that he's looking at the same polling we're all looking at. And, listen, he's hearing from people that, Cuomo is, has a lot of issues. He's a flawed candidate at this point. Curtis has a lot of baggage as well. None of these guys are coming within striking distance unless, one or two outlier polls here. So I think he's kind of just saying what all of us are in New York City are saying is that, this is Mamdani's race to lose. And, the question is going to be, what does the president do come January 1? How does that reshape how New York City and New York State arguably works with the president of the United States, with a governor who's, kind of created a blueprint of how to negotiate with the commander in chief here, where we haven't seen the National Guard.
Yeah. And I know, no rest for the weary, you're going to be covering the transition and the first 100 days, you told me. So we'll look forward to all of your reporting on what I am sure is going to be a very interesting first term for Mamdani if he does pull this off. Thanks for coming on, Craig. We appreciate your reporting.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Okay, and stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Battleground NYC after the break. We're back with more Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. Let's get to more headlines from the race and the debate last night. Joining me now for the bigger picture is John Avlon. He's a former New York congressional candidate. He's an author. He's a journalist, and he's chairman of Citizens Union, an organization working to reform New York City and state government. He's also a friend of mine. Welcome, John.
Oh, always good to see you.
You too. Okay. I can't wait to talk to you about the debate. I'm so excited that you're here. For 3 whole segments, we get to do this. As you know, it was the second and final debate of the general election. It felt like the candidates knew that. It felt like they left nothing, unsaid, undone. Did anyone win it, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think Cuomo won. I think Sliwa had a good debate. I think Mamdani really, for the first time, folded under some of the pressure he faced. Look, he's such a good communicator. He has a lot of sound bites and zingers that he's ready to deploy, and he can think on his feet as well. But there was a lot of incoming last night, as well as moderators who pressed him for specifics that sometimes he couldn't provide. And he repeated some of his zingers, which is always a sign of somebody defaulting to talking points. I think Cuomo was much more confident, was much more aggressive, and much more authentic. So, the second debates never matter as much as the first. But I do think Cuomo had a good night, and Mamdani had a far weaker performance than he did in the first.
And I want to talk about Cuomo, but sticking with Mamdani right now, it was, I agree, really the first time I'd seen him take some serious incoming that he couldn't totally handle. And I've seen almost every interview he's done. Those moments where he could not be specific on the positions, where Errol Lewis, the moderator, a friend of ours as well, really pressed him. And then I thought the sort of nail in the coffin was when Errol Lewis did a callback to a moment in the debate, as an example of the thing he was talking about. It was not good. Do you think it matters, though? Because over the course of this campaign, Mamdani's supporters have not really cared that his ideas are big and vague, that maybe even some of them can't happen. Does it matter that he had these stumbles last night?
I think it does matter, but again, it may not be decisive for a decisive number of voters. Fewer people presumably watch the second debate than a first debate. Also, you never get a second chance to make first impressions, as you well know. That said, I do think the moderators and our friend Errol did a phenomenal job of just staying on task. They were not biased in any way, shape, or form, but they were properly pressing for specifics. I mean, that moment where Mamdani could not answer or had to admit, in effect, that he hadn't taken a position on Charter Revision Commission proposals in front of the voters that would directly address the housing shortage. That's embarrassing. That's malpractice. That it does make him look like kind of a typical politician tiptoeing around, as opposed to his very on-brand authenticity. Particularly when he's focused on issues of affordability. You know, we have a 1% vacancy rate, and therefore you need to increase supply. So I thought that was a particularly damaging moment.
How do you think he handled the Israel question? He's had a lot of attempts at this and swats at it. How did he do last night?
I don't think he did what was necessary to calm concerns among people who are concerned. He is a very empathetic figure, and he communicates that empathy. He told a moving story about sitting on a bus next to a woman who said, my child is all for you, but I'm afraid. I've got concerns. And he said, I intend to make sure everyone is safe. Well, there are at least two problems with this. First of all, a lot of his public policy proposals, even though I think he took the step of saying he would try to keep Jessica Tisch, and that should alleviate some concerns. But his sort of fundamental disagreement philosophically with broken windows theory and quality of life policing, his past hostility to the police, it's hard to say he's going to be a mayor who keeps everybody safe. And the second is when he's gotten pressed on specific questions about Israel, right? Obviously, you know, his rather delayed denunciation and somewhat reluctant denunciation for Globalize the Intifada in the last debate, where he had to sort of say, of course, I think that Hamas should disarm. He's had to be sort of dragged to these positions that are common sense to many New Yorkers, particularly at a time when we are dealing with rising incidents of anti-Semitism. So when he deflects to a broad point, it doesn't address the specific concern. And therefore, I don't think it actually gets the job done.
You mentioned his issues with police and crime. How do you think he handled that issue last night?
Look, better, because I think by finally publicly saying he would offer the job to Jessica Tisch, not floating it through back channels, which could be seen as a feint or a deflect. You know, that's one thing Bill de Blasio did well. I think he was not an effective mayor. Mamdani thinks he was the best mayor of his lifetime, which is not a popular position, but I suppose points for authenticity. But he brought back Bill Bratton. You know, and by making sure, if you're going to have a very ideological sort of progressive agenda or any kind of ideological agenda, you need to make sure you get the big things right. Public safety is job number one. Mayor's got 3 jobs. Keep crime low, quality of life high, and the tax base growing. And those things are all connected. So by saying he keeps Jessica Tisch, whether or not she'll stay is another matter. That should address some people's concerns. It's not the issue of forming a Department of Public Safety where mental health professionals deal with mentally ill. That could be a good thing if it helps deal with quality of life crimes and frees up cops to deal with violent crime. But they need to really, lean into both. And so a step in the right direction, but there'll be some folks who can't forget those tweets from 2018, 2020.
John Avlon, stay right there. I've got lots more questions for you about the debate and everything else going on in the country. Don't go anywhere. More Battleground NYC after this. Welcome back to Battleground NYC. Once again, we're joined by John Avlon, chairman of Citizens Union. John, let's talk about Andrew Cuomo and how he did last night. He landed a bunch of zingers last night, but were they effective this late in the game with just 12 days left?
Look, I mean, late is better than never for any candidate. He was more polished. He was more confident. I don't think he was able to completely erase concerns. It was interesting to see both candidates, Mamdani and Sliwa, and actually all 3 of them, try to paint the other as Trump's preferred candidate, which is a fascinating thing. Obviously, the point being that, Mamdani, Trump seems to want him as a foil. At the same time, he has said he doesn't want him to be mayor, right? And so it does speak to how deeply unpopular many of Donald Trump's actions are in the city and state of New York, especially right now. And I thought the opening question, which was about ICE agents, sort of doing a masked clearing out of Canal Street, was very timely and speaks to, I think, the urgency, the danger. If Trump tries to make an example of New York, if Mamdani is elected, that's on the one hand a tactic that requires sort of fear-mongering future projection, but it's not an impossible scenario. And it's one more factor for people to take into account. The strongest argument Cuomo has is that he's a builder, that he's experienced, that he can do the job. And I do think that's Mamdani's greatest weakness at the end of the day, is just a lack of any executive experience.
Mamdani also went after Cuomo on his sexual harassment allegations, even pointing out that one of his accusers was in the room. But voters know this about Cuomo, so I'm wondering if that really damages him in the way that Mamdani, who is unknown still to a lot of people, I think Cuomo and Sliwa were able to reveal things about Mamdani last night in a way that I don't know. Even pointing out some of Cuomo's scandals is actually revealing anything. But what was your take on that?
You could hear an audible gasp, and having a crowd, I think, changes the dynamics. But when it was revealed that Mamdani had brought in one of Cuomo's accusers to the room, I think the difficulty that Cuomo has had isn't that people don't know that he stepped down from being governor and the number of accusations leveled against him, but the frustration he feels that none of those cases were ultimately adjudicated, and so he has not been able to show a degree of contrition or humility or empathy for people who have felt. I might like to vote for him, but I haven't seen the degree of sort of apology, humility, contrition, reflection, which is different than saying, yeah, I did it, but saying, I've learned a lot and I'm going to try to have actually a more empathetic heart and be more understanding and be more unifying, more humble. You haven't heard any of that from him. And I think that's been a stumbling block because a lot of people who've effectively wanted to would I think want permission to vote for Cuomo have been looking for that kind of personal touch, and they just haven't seen it over the course of this campaign.
No, not on that issue, not on the nursing home scandal, really none of that. Let's talk about Curtis Sliwa. He had a good night. He got a lot of audience applause, and I think he did what he needed to do, tying Mamdani and Cuomo together and saying, like, I'm the change candidate. These guys are the same old. But are there enough Republicans in New York? I feel like I might have been the last one, John. Are there enough Republicans in New York to push him over the line, or is he just fated to be a spoiler in this race?
Well, that's a mathematical question for which there is a correct answer. The answer is no.
I know.
I mean, the city is 6-1 Democratic. We should be enfranchising independent voters. We should have open primaries. My wife is a Republican, as you know, so you're not the last one. But I think that New York Republican tradition of every 25 years, New York elected a reform Republican, a liberal, often running on a liberal line. That was a really powerful corrective for the city of New York. Rudy and Bloomberg fell into that, but Fiorello LaGuardia, John Lindsay. That's been taken off the table. And so it does raise, I think, some questions about the results that people shouldn't take for granted. It's not that Sliwa was going to rocket to the front of the pack. It's that the Democratic primary is a very different slice of the electorate than a general election, even though the city's overwhelmingly Democratic. And so while Mamdani had a decisive win, it was still less than 10% of all registered voters. Right. So that's why I think people shouldn't sleep on this race or call it a foregone conclusion. But yes, Sliwa had a good night. He's he spent most of his life being a radio show host, although he quit yesterday, as you pointed out. And he knows how to play to the crowd and speak like he's got nothing to lose, because in fact he doesn't.
Yeah. So I mean, that was going to be my last question before we go to break. Did this debate change anything, given that so many people did not come out for the primary and the debates are when a lot of people tune in for the first time?
I think it could. Again, second debate's less impact than first. I'd also say that, we've had a number of rabbis, I think over 600 coming out expressing concern. Mamdani has a lot of enthusiasm. I mean, people really excited, but a lot of other people very concerned. So those two forces are going to be at play, but you've just got a much broader, it's why general elections matter. And frankly, we should have open general elections with ranked choice voting. That would be healthier for the city all the way through the process.
Totally agree. Okay, don't go anywhere because I've still got more questions for you. After the break, more Battleground NYC when we return. We're back with more Battleground NYC one more time with John Avlon. So I talked to Craig about this, but Eric Adams is going to endorse Andrew Cuomo, as we know. Is that going to matter? Does that endorsement mean something?
Yes, I think it does. Sitting mayor with a strong base of support, albeit small. He didn't have a prayer in the general, but the fact that those forces are consolidating, I do think matters. It's a momentum shifter for Andrew Cuomo. Is it enough? Only time will tell. But can you objectively say this isn't a sign of momentum? No, I don't think you can fairly say that. So there's some consolidation and momentum behind Andrew Cuomo at the right time / last possible moment for his campaign.
Yeah, fair point. Okay. This is, as you know, a national race. It's getting national attention from left and right. Trump figured prominently in last night's debate. And there's a new report suggesting he thinks Mamdani is unbeatable. But isn't that ultimately what he wants? He wants the foil, right?
He's shown every suggestion. I think he's probably a little torn between concerns about what it will mean for his pals, his properties. But ultimately, no, he wants a foil. And that's a large part of Andrew Cuomo's argument. As our friend Errol Lewis has said previously, Mamdani is everything the far right said Barack Obama was. Born in Africa, Muslim, and actually a socialist. But look, he's a uniquely talented, compelling communicator. And he's been an inspirational figure for a lot of young voters who haven't participated before. So this is a test. The problem is it's an executive job, and the power clashes between a president and a mayor in an extreme scenario are going to require more than speaking skills. They're going to require real spine, and that partly comes out of experience.
John, where is Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries? Where is he?
He did speak to the New York Economic Club this week. He has not been MIA, but he has been avoiding this race, as you note, as has Senator Schumer. Look, Mamdani is a very divisive figure, even inside the Democratic Party. You see it in the DSA candidates who are running against other folks. If it was purely a generational argument, I think we can actually agree there needs to be generational change. That's been one of the themes. But it's really about philosophy and experience and about the damage that the far left can do to mainstream moderate Democrats, centrist Democrats in swing districts and swing states. And for folks who haven't been persuaded that he's got the objective executive experience. So he's been laying low, and that does speak volumes. I think Kathy Hochul, endorsed Mamdani, and she feels that will help build a relationship. So different calculations, but notable that a Democratic nominee would not have the support of the minority leader in the House or Senate.
It's wild. I think it's wild, but I understand Hakeem Jeffries' job. I get that, but it's wild. But the other thing is that Mamdani has inspired, I think, a lot of other younger candidates to run and challenge either establishment candidates or older candidates. We've had some of them on this show to talk about that. What do you make of Graham Plattner's race in Maine? He's running against Susan Collins, but Governor Janet Mills has gotten in now, and I assume her team did some oppo dumps on him. What are you making of his run?
Signs point to yes. Look, he's certainly been on defense. And if the first thing people find out about you, if they're only beginning to pay attention, is that you had a Nazi tattoo, which you've since covered up, that's not good, particularly because, we've had young Republicans and other national Republicans getting caught on chats praising Hitler. And if you can't denounce that, I don't know what your bar is. Let alone a White House appointee who stepped down this week. That's something that's really concerning to see this percolating in the undergrounds. It's a function of our polarization. Look, there needs to be generational change in politics. I think we should have term limits. I don't think anyone needs more than 2 decades in the House of Representatives. If you haven't done enough good by then, it's a citizen legislature. So that part is healthy. I think the ideological purity tests and purging is unhealthy. And I think there also needs to be an awareness that, yes, you need to be populist on economics or focus on rebuilding the middle class, which is getting squeezed and screwed over for decades. But the answer, the far left sometimes has a blind spot into how alienating it can be. And that's not necessarily a path to victory, particularly in swing districts and swing states.
Well, speaking of, should someone like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, should someone like her run for president in 2028?
It's a free country. I don't think it would be in Democrats' interests. I do think authenticity matters a lot. And I think people who have the courage of their convictions can sway conversations. But we desperately need to reunite as a nation. My hope is that the center left, in particular in blue states, can be the reform force. That means not being a defender of the status quo. It means disrupting the status quo with big plans that actually work with market forces, not against them, to solve problems, to bring people together. That's the energy I think we need to see. I wrote an op-ed about it recently in the New York Post in the context of New York State. But I think the center needs to play offense and be the reform force and not cede that ground to the extremes, because we'll only be more polarized and more paralyzed and fall further behind as a state, and I believe ultimately as a nation.
Well, if anyone knows the center, it's you, John Avlon. You've been writing about the center. You've been pushing us to get back to our center. I wholly agree with you. I think it's incredibly
Thank you,
important.
friend.
That's why this race is so interesting to cover, as well as the other ones that are happening right now. The country's
It
changing.
is.
Thanks for coming on, John. I really appreciate it.
Always a
Yeah.
pleasure. Be well,
Good to see
Leslie.
you, bud. Okay, and that does it for us, but we'll be back tomorrow, Friday, and every Monday through Friday until this race is over. Thanks for joining us at Battleground NYC. We appreciate it. We'll see you later.